As I'm sure you're probably aware, I am primarily known as an anime critic. Nevertheless, I have been playing and analyzing video games on the side for about the same amount of time, and back in 2014 I made a video called Why and How I Play Games and Why Reviewers Should Be Telling You This. The basic theory was that since there is no such thing as an objectively good game, the only way a qualitative review has any meaning is if the audience has a firm understanding of what the reviewer's expectations are for what would make the game good. This is possible to establish within the confines of a single review, but it usually takes a number of them before an audience will develop a strong grasp on what a particular critic tends to gravitate towards in games. While I personally find it interesting to consume analysis from any critic regardless of their tastes, if you're looking to get a better understanding of your own opinions on a subject through a critic, or to get recommendations on what is worth consuming, then you'll have a much easier time if you go into the review knowing what that critic is all about. Given that gaming is such a massive and multifaceted medium, it's no surprise that different players are prone to having wildly different tastes. There are more than enough games in existence belonging to any well-established genre that you might not even have to stray from your comfort zone to have a sizable catalog of worthwhile experiences. Moreover, given that video games require even more engagement than other forms of media, most players are likely to be a lot more strict with things that they don't like. Wasting your time on a game you hate when it's 60 hours long is going to offend you a lot more than perhaps watching all the way through a shitty 12-episode anime in less than 5. For me personally, it's very easy to nip a vast majority of games that I won't like in the bud, because one of the most important things to me is kinesthetics, or the feeling of movement. Controls, if you will. I can't stand playing games where the controls are not tight and responsive, and I am immediately enraged when control is wrestled away from me in the name of a scripted sequence or diminished in a walking segment. The more one-to-one control I feel over a character, and the more satisfying things I can do with that character, the more likely I am to enjoy the game. Having said that, I am not the type of gamer to experiment heavily with the controls or to learn advanced combos and techniques. If a game pushes me to learn how to do something more complex in order to complete it, then I might push myself to learn in the name of making it to the end, but I am not likely to expend any more effort than how much is necessary in any given encounter on the way there. This comes from a sense of only really being gratified by measurable progression through a game. Setting my own goals and accomplishing them is less appealing to me than simply accomplishing whatever the game puts in front of me to do. The reason I feel this way is that video games do not interest me much as a mode of creative expression. Perhaps this is because I already am fulfilled creatively by having a creative career, and because my expressions of self are a lot more specific and personal than what a game is capable of providing, regardless of how many options it gives me. Complex character creation, sandbox games that ask you to make your own fun, and what might be described as open canvas games are therefore not very appealing to me, especially because the tendency in game design is that the more options which are provided to the player in what they can do, the lower the quality of each individual aspect. Many of my favorite games are very tightly crafted linear experiences, which are built around a central set of mechanics and seek to explore every possibility which those mechanics allow for. 2D platformers, for instance, tend to involve some kind of distinct control gimmick around which their challenges are built, and then to have their levels structured around every possible permutation of challenge which those controls allow for, and thus are satisfying to complete, as you feel as if you followed the train of logic proposed by the developer to its conclusion. But of course, it's not as though my gaming experiences are all about unique mechanical epiphanies. If you asked me what about gaming has made it such a mainstream hobby over the last few decades, I would say it's the psychological grooming of a good gameplay loop. Most successful games are on some level competency simulators. They open with some brand of on-the-job training and then put you to a repetitive task with constant slight variations and ask you to simply prove that you are paying attention to the rules. Pressing buttons feels good, being told that you've done a good job feels good, and falling into that gratifying cycle is a way to pass the overlong extra days we've been granted by social modernization. What I'm trying to say in the most pretentious way possible is that they're a fun way to kill time. I have almost never spent extremely long amounts of time with individual games, because gaming is not my only hobby, and I like to consume as many different products as humanly possible. I will go out of my way to constantly start up new things even if I never get around to finishing them, because I want to experience as many unique ideas as my lifespan allows for, and the amount which exist and are good is innumerable. However, just a small handful of games have hit that perfect sweet spot of predictable outcomes, satisfying inputs, constant slight variance, and aesthetically pleasing atmosphere as to draw me in a lot longer than others. It takes such a very specific and personal combination of elements to hook me that I can't even define the parameters of it broadly. I would have to examine those games on a case-by-case basis to figure out where that magic happened. While we're on that topic, aesthetics are also a very big deal to me. I like to spend as much of my time as possible looking at things which look nice and are created with some kind of artistic sense. It's hard to really put into words without getting into art theory mumbo jumbo, but it's kind of a know it when you see it thing that again would be best studied case by case. Games with unique and appealing aesthetics will always catch my eye right away, but in a medium as complex as gaming, it's only inevitable that very few games will actually nail every single element of art design which must go into crafting a fully simulated world. When it's done well though, I can make a lot of allowances for other issues just to be able to explore a world that looks cool enough. Just the experience of getting to simulate living in some kind of aesthetically divergent world that I like is one of the most important experiences which gaming can provide to me. If I can also perform a satisfying task with interesting mechanics inside of that world, then I will probably find one of my favorite games. There's also the element of narrative, which I feel a lot of games writing has framed poorly. Most video game writing is absolutely terrible, as is recognizable to anyone regularly consuming other forms of media. However, games have the most different ways to convey narrative of any medium in existence, especially in that a game can easily involve many other forms of media inside of themselves. Games which go out of their way to explore the narrative possibilities of their medium are inherently interesting to me, especially if they can actually craft an engaging story in the process of doing so. If a game relies too much on lengthy cutscenes and set pieces to convey its narrative, and these are anything less than riveting to watch, I will probably hate and skip them. Now let me discuss some of my peculiarities as a player. Inevitably, with games leaving so much of the experience in the hands of the player, everyone will engage somewhat differently. I am the type to play in long, unbroken sessions and to try to beat a game as fast as possible. I can do this because I am self-employed, and I am driven to because I always feel like I need to get back to work as fast as possible. When I get invested in something, it tends to completely dominate all of my thinking, and so if I prolong my time with a game too much, it will keep me from everything else that I should or want to be doing. If a game takes too long to beat, I will probably either start to lose interest or just never get back to it if I start having to do too many other things. As such, I tend to favor shorter games that I can blast through in a couple of days and to only play longer ones very occasionally. Depending on what game I'm playing, I'm also prone to eventually turning off the music or even all of the sound and to play my own music or podcasts over it. Sometimes this is because a game has too little music in it to begin with, and I feel uncomfortable in silence as I'm used to having sound playing nearly at all times. Other times it's because the music is overly repetitive or in a genre which I'm not a fan of and just becomes grating to me. Recently I've been playing more games with the sound on because I have a setup which lends itself to doing so, but I will always try to make a note of what sonic experience I had with the game during review. With all of that explained, let's now try applying what we know about my taste to a couple of games in a very simplified way. Red Dead Redemption is a game which suits my tastes very poorly. Its controls are extremely imprecise and stiff, with the over-animated character model taking too long to react to button presses. There is a ton of stuff that can be done in the game, but each of those things individually is mechanically uninteresting. Much of the appeal of the game to those who enjoy it seems to be the free exploration and making your own fun, which I get bored of immediately. And in the absence of that play, the main storyline missions are boring and samey, with in-between travel time that comes off as a massive waste when you're not exploring the open world. Aesthetically, the game is thoroughly unremarkable, as it tries to simply depict the Wild West in the most classic and photorealistic way possible. Nothing about the landscape is designed with aesthetic consideration, and the setting doesn't appeal to me, given that it's just a bunch of barren brown desert and generic countryside. Its narrative consists almost exclusively of painfully long, terribly scripted cutscenes which make me want to kill myself. Given that the game is also incorrigibly long, I would not play this game to conclusion in a million years. Metroid Prime, on the other hand, is a game which fits my taste to a T. Movement is fast, responsive, and allows for exacting control over the character. Every action which you can perform is paced and animated in the most satisfying way possible. Even though the areas you've progressed through are open to be explored at your leisure, playing it straightforwardly yields a tightly crafted experience that pushes all of its mechanics into new permutations of challenge and introduces different complications consistently, while testing your ability to perform the actions allowed by those mechanics up to a fairly high level of competency. Its dense, detailed world is both aesthetically beautiful and satisfying to traverse, and is made atmospheric through unique color design and a consistently phenomenal soundtrack. Narrative is conveyed through environmental storytelling and optional text logs which fill in the blanks of many different story elements, from the actual narrative of what's happening on the planet to information on how it functions and its history. Moreover, the game can easily be beaten in the span of a single afternoon, and then faster and faster as you learn it better. If you just can't get enough of it, there's also an incredible wealth of secrets to be found by scouring the world. Obviously, none of this is to say that there's nothing about Red Dead Redemption which I think is praiseworthy, nor nothing about Metroid Prime which I think is reasonable to have a problem with, but neither of those is my personal responsibility to give lip service to. I do not believe that any reviewer should be seen as singular, or that they should try to represent every conceivable perspective on a game, because those are innumerable. At best, you can try to account for a number of common variables that you predict on the basis of how a lot of gamers tend to feel about things, but you can't possibly account for every way that every person is going to take every element of the experience. What I find it much more important to focus on is making sure that your own perspective is as clearly understandable as possible, so that whether the viewer agrees or disagrees with your stance on things, they can appreciate the logic by which you approached it, and can therefore be inspired to figure out which logic it was by which they felt differently. Perhaps they identified the game in the same way that you did, but simply enjoyed the very things that you hated. Or perhaps their perspective on those things created a whole different understanding of what even was going on. This is the conversation that I think is interesting to have about why we do or don't like games, and it's the one that I hope to foster in analyzing them. If you want to listen to me analyzing video games, I've so far created 5 reviews on my journey through the entire Nintendo GameCube library, and also made a 2.5-hour video with my younger brother discussing The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild in intimate detail. I'm going to be making a video about Super Mario Odyssey next, and probably lots of other gaming content in the future, though this is not exclusively a gaming channel. It is a general analysis channel for whatever I happen to want to talk about. If you really like what you're seeing here and you want to help support the channel, please contribute to my Patreon. For $1, you get into my patron exclusive Discord, which is highly active. For $5, you get access to a bi-weekly podcast where me and my fiance talk about whatever we did in the last 2 weeks. For $15, you can get a rant video that I post on my After Dark channel. And for $40, you get a care package where I literally mail you a flash drive full of exclusive content. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.